My name is Tracy Carluccio, and I'm Deputy Director of Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And this is Lauren Williams, and she's with Curtin and Hefner. She's an attorney, and we're going to be sharing this presentation here today. So our topic is Undermining the Environmental Good Samaritan Act. And our concerns about the Good Samaritan Act and the way it's being undermined are related to a piece of legislation that's moving ahead in the General Assembly now, and that's called SB 411, Senate Bill 411. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward, and I have some action alerts here today for what people can do in order to get involved in this issue at the legislative level, if you're interested in that. We hope you are. So right now, though, I'd like to sort of set the stage about what the issues are and what people are concerned about in terms of the Environmental Good Samaritan Act. So you may be aware that the Environmental Good Samaritan Act was passed as a way to pass indemnity onto watershed organizations and community groups, conservation districts, to clean up coal mine drainage, or what we colloquially call acid mine drainage waters. Unfortunately, we have a big problem here in legacy of coal in Pennsylvania. This is a picture of the Newkirk Tunnel. It's at Sharp Mountain near Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, and it flows to the Little Schuylkill River. You may know that this region is anthracite coal, and that coal was very important. It was one of the first coals used for energy, and it fueled Philadelphia and helped to begin, really, the foundation of the nation because of its proximity to Philadelphia. But there was a lot of environmental legacy that has been damaging to our waterways, damaging to our environment as a result of that. Coal mining began in Pennsylvania really early on in the mid-1700s to fuel this new nation that, of course, was first founded in Philadelphia. And Pennsylvania is the fourth largest coal producer in the US today, so it's not just a matter of an historic development or an historic extraction. It's a matter of it continuing on today, not certainly as it was in the past, but certainly as the fourth largest coal producer, it certainly continues to be active. Anthracite is here in this region, in the northeastern Pennsylvania area. The Schuylkill is very influenced by anthracite coal and the geologies associated with that. And then down in the central part of Pennsylvania and the western part of Pennsylvania, and there are some outliers to this, but that's mainly the bituminous coals, which is a softer coal. Anthracite is a harder coal. So we have now, as a result of all of these mines being developed, back before there was any federal regulation or state regulation, what they call orphan or abandoned mines. So these are, mines that were put in, coal was extracted, and the owners went away. And what has been left behind is what you see a photo of here, which is basically what the state calls mine-influenced water, but it's acid mine drainage or drainage out of these mines that carry with it pollutants and that tend to be acidic, although we'll hear that they're not all acidic. So we have over 5,000 of the 83,000 streams and stream miles in Pennsylvania have been polluted by acid mine drainage. This is a huge problem for our state. So acid mine drainage, in the analyses that are done by environmental agencies, is known to be the largest source of non-point source pollution. That's pollution that runs off the land, not from a discharge point, in Pennsylvania. So it really limits the ability of lots of streams to be healthy, and it also impacts water quality for drinking water supplies that are drawn from those waterways, as well as groundwater influences. Over 200,000 acres of acid mine lands statewide are impacted by the coal pollution legacy. And that's really in the eastern part of the state and the central and western part of the state where coal mining has historically occurred. Some examples of some of the things that are spectacularly difficult to handle are the mine fires. We still have 38 underground mine fires burning in Pennsylvania that cannot be extinguished. And you've heard of Centralia, and that's very famous, but we've got 38 of them going. And also we have thousands of acres of culm piles, and that's the waste that's brought up after they mine. And that is just thousands upon thousands of the acreage that's influenced by that. You heard this morning a reference to Cherry Town's book, A River Again, which is about the Schuylkill and its impacts of coal mining on the Schuylkill. And there were culm piles or waste from mining that had sedimented into the Schuylkill River and limited the fish life in the river and the water quality of the river for right to today. But there was a huge effort made several years ago to clean out those culm piles and to make the river as much as possible, restore the river as much as possible to a natural flow regime or a healthy flow regime. And that is what her book is about. But that's an example of how culm piles come off the land and then end up in major waterways and influence the quality of the water. As you know, Philadelphia, for instance, gets its water from the Schuylkill and the Delaware River, and there's actually 2 major water intakes on the Schuylkill. So the quality of the water that's drunk by the urban areas in Pennsylvania, particularly our most major urban area here in Philadelphia, directly is influenced by culm piles and coal legacy through the intakes on the Schuylkill. So what is the answer to all these problems? Well, the answer is really watershed reclamation and acid mine drainage or coal mine drainage cleanups. And this is being done in as much, it's called the Pennsylvania Comprehensive Plan for Abandoned Mine Reclamation by the bureaucracies, but it's really being done by volunteers and watershed organizations across the state where this acid mine drainage is a problem. This is a picture of Robert Hughes. He's with an organization who covers this area and all of the anthracite area, and they dedicate themselves to mine reclamation and restoring the streams that have been impacted by anthracite coal in this region. And so that's an example of the engagement of communities and watershed organizations in making right what has been destroyed through the legacy of coal development here. Also, the restoration of fish and fish life, very important because acid mine drainage limits the biological life in the stream. So it's very, very important as a big goal to work to making those waterways not only good water supplies, but also healthy in terms of macroinvertebrate communities and the fish and fish life that live there. And that is a big goal of the organizations working. And as far as this effort, there are many, many groups in Pennsylvania doing this. But it was really a problem to try to start working on this in the beginning when this effort was started to clean up these waterways because there were certain liabilities that the lawyers were screaming about. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of these mines, most of them are abandoned or they're orphans. That is, there's no responsible party. So as a result of that, the watershed organizations and those that wanted to work to clean up these waterways wanted to make sure that they weren't not going to be taking on the liabilities associated with those who caused the pollution problem. So that was the beginning of this concept of passing the Environmental Good Samaritan Act. And that act, which Robert Hughes and his Western counterpart organization worked on, that's the act that they worked together and crafted and put through the legislature in order to make sure that those who are volunteering at conservation districts and community groups, nonprofit organizations, to clean up these waterways were not going to inherit liabilities. And that really made all of this happen. That was the grease that went on the wheels that made the cleanup of waterways that are influenced by and destroyed, in many cases completely by, our coal legacy, get engaged and be able to actually pull off these cleanups without having this hang-up of liability. So as far as this effort is concerned, it has been in place for several years now, and a lot of work is going on. Organizations like Robert Hughes's organization also work on doing things like mapping the underground waterways. As you can imagine, coal, of course, removes so much from the ground that new pathways, new pools are formed in the aquifer areas. And as a result of that, you have a problem when you go to try to clean up these waterways without understanding what the mine pool and the underground aquifer flows are like. So they work on that, and that's something that's a very important effort and part of the work that they do. This is not the answer. This is a gas, basically a frac pit at a gas well site. And SB 411, which Lauren will talk about a little more as soon as I'm done, would incentivize the use of acid mine drainage in fracking and perhaps other uses as well, hydraulic fracturing for gas. And what the SB 411 would do is extend the immunity under the Environmental Good Samaritan Act to water withdrawals who would take the water away from the acid mine drainage watersheds and take it over to where they want to use it for fracking. Now, this is not the answer for a lot of different reasons. And I think, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the technical problems. But one of the major problems that we have is that we don't have enough data, as I just said before, about what all this, what's under the ground. Where does the water flow? Whose wells are connected to this water? How important is that water for the base flow of that stream? So when you take the water away to a frac site, for instance, to use it in fracking, you're removing the base flow of a stream. We don't know how much of that water could be taken away without impacting the stream, but we do know that once you take water away from a sub-watershed and never bring it back, you deplete it or you consume it. And as a result of that, those watersheds, those sub-watersheds that support those streams are not going to be able to have the base flow, the healthy base flow to support fish and fish life and drinking water supplies unless it's cleaned up at the site and kept there. And that's what the watershed associations and the conservation districts are doing. Their treatment efforts that they're putting in place actually keep the water in the sub-watershed and allow that sub-watershed to benefit from a cleaned up flow. If the water is taken away, it is then removed from that sub-watershed and never comes back. And as a result of that, you have actually depleted that flow that's needed to keep that and restore that, that stream system. The other problem that we have is that we have corrosion. We have a lot of questions about, gee, what would it actually do in terms of fracking? Because this bill is being put forward as an environmental bill. It would somehow reduce the use of water, which is very consumptive use of water for natural gas development. It would reduce that use by allowing acid mine drainage to be used instead. The problem is that we have a lot of technical questions. I'm not a scientist. I am not a person who's up on all the technical problems. I did read the RAND report, and I did read some other technical papers that have been produced, particularly since Pennsylvania DEP has looked into this. They have a white paper, which is very interesting. But basically, the problem is that we have corrosion, we have erosive impacts from using this material. And as the RAND report makes very clear when looking at both of these types of coal, there's different properties. Some of them are alkaline, some of them are acidic. Treatment questions. First of all, the SB 411 would not require this acid mine drainage to be treated. You'd be able to take it out of the stream as it is, take it over for fracking, precipitate it out in a basin, and mix it with either recycled flowback from a previous well frac job or fresh water, and then use it in the fracking. So you're not cleaning the water, this water up. And whether or not you could clean it up has a lot of technical complexities to it. And that's what the RAND report talks about. And those technical problems may be surmountable, but they may not be. And we don't know that at this point in time. Technical folks have taken a good hard look at this, and we have some of those reports and links to them in the paper that I have. But basically, the problem is that we don't know how expensive it'll be. As is made very clear in the RAND report, the withdrawals that would be made and the operators that would employ this acid mine drainage. Their bottom line is going to be to increase make sure that your questions at the end, that productivity is not negatively impacted. They want to make sure, of course, that their bottom line is supported by using the AMD. So they're not going to be doing it like their watershed groups are out of the goodness of their heart because they care about the sub-watersheds. They're going to be doing it to save money and increase well productivity. And whether or not that can actually happen, we do not know at this point in time. Sulfates are a big problem. There's barium, strontium, and there's naturally occurring radioactive materials that need to be addressed. And those issues do complicate what we can actually see coming out of the development of wells from the use of acid mine drainage. And finally, this session 2 paper, which is also from that RAND conference, puts forward a lot of other issues that make it very clear that the expense, and then in the end, the products that you have to get rid of after you have used the acid mine drainage mixed with waters for fracking, what challenges do they put forward? And one of them is the fact that naturally occurring radioactive materials are expected to precipitate out. So you're going to have a sludge in the bottom of that frack pit. And that is a serious issue that's brought up in this paper. So I think before Lauren comes up, I want to make it very clear that acid mine drainage can be used today. You can get approval and you can do that today. As a matter of fact, some of the streams where water is being withdrawn for fracking is acid mine or coal mine influenced already. And so it's not a matter of whether or not you can use it, although that's an important consideration if the legislature is considering incentivizing the use of acid mine drainage. But it's really all about the immunity, because what SB 411 would do is extend that immunity that was meant for the community who's cleaning up these watersheds to the water withdrawal. And that immunity would then mean that those impacts such as land subsidence, mine subsidence, aquifer depletion, removal of water that's not available for water supplies, any of the community impacts in these sub-watersheds, they would be immune from having to take responsibility for negative impacts. That's the big problem with SB 411. And at this point, Lauren is going to step forward. She's going to discuss further some of the issues and also cast this issue in the light of the recent Supreme Court decision related to the Environmental Rights Act of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And just so everyone knows, Lauren will be going for about 15 minutes, then we'll come up together and cover a few more issues, such as the advocacy that's being done by citizens across Pennsylvania on this issue, and we'll be open for Q&A at that point too, questions and answers. Thank you.
So first I'd like to apologize. I'm fighting an upper respiratory infection, so I sound like I have a frog in my throat. That's why.
You sound fine.
Okay, very good. So as Tracy mentioned, I'm an attorney. I work at Curtin and Hefner. We've worked with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network on challenging Act 13, and we've also done several reviews of SB 411. We have the most recent version of the bill here, if you're interested. As Tracy mentioned, SB 411 would amend the Environmental Good Samaritan Act to create a whole new area of projects. If you're familiar with the Environmental Good Samaritan Act, it has what's called a water pollution abatement project. There are different types of projects that you can do under the EGSA, so to speak, including cleaning up orphaned wells, cleaning up, gob piles and things of that nature. What we're looking at is actually the water treatment process. The SB 411 sort of, as we've said, is sort of a perversion of the Environmental Good Samaritan Act because it creates a category of water treatment project that has nothing to do with water treatment. The current version of the bill, and it's gone through several iterations, would give immunity, as Tracy's already alluded to the water withdrawal site. Originally, when the bill was proposed, it was very expansive immunity that literally would have gone from water withdrawal all the way through to the fracking site. While it's been scaled back, it still creates the concerns that Tracy's been referencing as far as what kind of legal options is a landowner going to have if they've been damaged by the water withdrawal site. So Tracy was talking about mine pools. Mine pools, if you're not familiar with them, are literally large underground, well, they could be large, it could be small. There's a lot of information that we don't know, but basically if you withdraw a lot of water from the mine pool and you're not careful about how that mine pool's been discharging into the local waterway, you could effectively create a vacuum effect where you're drawing in more water into the mine pool as you're drawing it out, causing depletion of local wells, local water wells. If you're really not paying attention, subsidence, because all this water is now being drawn into this, this mine pool area. And under SB 411, what would effectively happen is there would be immunity to the water withdrawal company for that sort of damage. There's some water replacement provisions under SB 411, but again, we've already seen sort of the track record with water replacement in the oil and gas context, and it hasn't been particularly positive. So it leaves communities having to fight for their water resources. And I think stepping back from this, we have to look at this and say, these communities that are experiencing us, they've had coal come through and they're continuing to experience the damage from that legacy. And now we're basically saying to them, look, your water is effectively worth less than these other places where we want to save their clean water and not withdraw it for gas development. So we're going to allow somebody to come in, just set up a water withdrawal site. That's all they have to do. They don't have to treat the water. They don't have to make anything better in the watershed. They just have to set up a water withdrawal site, and they can start shipping that water off without doing anything to help the community. At the other end of the spectrum, you then have places experiencing shale gas development. And just to be clear, SB 411 would authorize the water withdrawals, not just for shale gas development, but for agricultural use, power plant cooling towers, any sort of quote-unquote beneficial use, which is very broadly defined. It's pretty much anything with some sort of economic or environmental benefit. So any use where you're effectively replacing a freshwater withdrawal would allow you to set up a water withdrawal site to take mine drainage. And just to be clear, there's both acid and alkaline. So while we've been saying acid, I just want to be clear that there are differences. But anyway, you would take, all you have to do is set up this water withdrawal site and ship this water off. But then you're looking at the place where this water is going. You're now bringing in water that hasn't been treated into perhaps a clean watershed, cleaner watershed, relatively speaking. So you're not only damaging the source watershed by taking base flow, by potentially damaging water wells and properties, but you're also taking polluted water to a new place that we don't, no one's really characterized that water. No one's really sure what it's going to do if it's been spilled or things of that nature. And in looking at this, recently we had the Robinson Township decision. And for those who aren't familiar, Robinson Township decision was a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision on Act 13 of 2012, which amended the Oil and Gas Act and to do many different things. The biggest parts that we challenged were the zoning and takeaway of local control, in addition to some of the stream setback waiver provisions. And in the pluralities decision, which was 3 justices, there were 4 justices that declared certain sections unconstitutional. 3 of them struck those provisions down under Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And Section 27 has several parts. One talks about individual environmental rights, and the other part talks about the public trust. that the Commonwealth has an obligation to conserve and maintain our public natural resources for present and future Pennsylvanians. And the public trust issue was really why the court struck down the zoning and other local control provisions, or takeaway of local control, I should say. But in discussing, the court took a lot of time to really discuss Section 27, to discuss the plain language of this amendment. And I don't have the language with me today, but it's really just 3 sentences. They're very simple, but at the same time, there's a lot in them, as we discovered.
Right here, if you want to read
Very
it.
good. We'll have a constitutional reading right now. So, Section 27, Article 1, Section 27, I should say. The people have a right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. So that's Clause 1. That's talking about individual environmental rights. And then the next 2 sentences talk about the public trust. Pennsylvania's public natural resources are the common property of all the people, including generations yet to come. As trustee of these resources, the Commonwealth shall conserve and maintain them for the benefit of all the people. So as part of discussing all the different duties and obligations that are wrapped up in that language, the court discussed the necessity for government, whether it's a state agency, the General Assembly, or local government, to engage in some sort of pre-action analysis. I'm not going to say environmental impact analysis because nobody really, it's like I said, this is one decision and we're still sort of parsing it all out. But some sort of pre-action analysis as to what impact that action will have on environmental rights, on people's right to clean air and pure water, and also the impact on the public trust. If you're familiar with, let's say you're a trustee, and you are taking care of somebody's financial resources on their behalf. The trustee concept, that's the same concept in Section 27, but it's for your public, our public natural resources. So when you're a trustee, and you can't just spend the person's money. And in the same way, our legislature can't just spend, so to speak, our public natural resources. They have to think about what they're going to be doing in advance and what the action that they want to take, how that's going to impact the corpus of the trust. So our waterways, our groundwater, our air, our wildlife, anything that is a public natural resource, they have to think about in advance what the impact is going to be. And our concern with SB 411 has been that, as Tracy's already referenced, there's a lot that's unknown as far as not just shale gas development, that the science is still coming in, but as far as acid mine drainage and alkaline mine drainage. How is this going to impact a particular area where we don't even have a mine pool mapped? How is this going to impact a stream where the watershed is already at a critical level in terms of it's already a stressed watershed in terms of water quantity? How are we going to deal with the fact that now all this base flow is being taken away from this watershed permanently? So those are the sorts of things that we would like the General Assembly to think about. Whether they do is a different question. But as far as their constitutional obligations, they're required to think about that, to do those sorts of studies, to read what's out there, and to inform themselves about the impacts on not just communities, but our public natural resources before they take action. And I'm actually going to turn this back to you for a little. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So we'll both be up here for now, but just want to touch on the fact that the context of this moving forward. So a lot of people are upset about the concept, and there has been really a groundswell of people that have spoken up and said, wait a minute, let's step back here. What are the impacts going to be for these sub-watersheds that have already had to bear the brunt of pollution from coal. And now you're going to be taking their water away. And how will this compete with watershed organizations and conservation districts that have invested their blood, sweat, and tears in restoring these vulnerable waterways? So as a result of that, we have been working across the state with a lot of different organizations. Now 50 organizations have signed on to this letter, which is a letter that's being sent at this point to the Senate, because the Senate has already passed the bill out of committee and through the Appropriations Committee, and it is set to be voted on, and it's actually listed to be voted on Monday on the Senate floor. So this letter has been submitted several times with additional groups signing on over the last many months, telling our legislators, first of all, think about what Lauren's talking about. Think about Robinson Township. Think about the
abiding by the Constitution.
Abiding by the Constitution. You have a constitutional obligation to take a look at what this is going to do to the rights of the environment and the people that live there before you vote on this bill. And that's what we said in this letter, and that's what we're asking them to do. Stop and do the proper analysis before you take this action. But as a result of that, there has been an erosion of support, and in the Appropriations Committee, it was a large split vote. And so it has not moved forward, even though it's been listed on the Senate floor for many weeks. So we have actually made progress in that there are now senators who were thinking, gee, this sounds like a good idea. It'll reduce water. It'll somehow clean up waterways. It's not reducing water use necessarily. We don't know that. And it's not going to clean up those waterways, as Lauren explained. It does not require treatment at a date.
And I'm going to jump in really fast. One thing that we've encountered is this misperception that if I'm taking away acid mine drainage, therefore I'm cleaning up the water. We've had to really engage in some education that there's a difference between taking the pollutants away from the water by treating it versus taking the water and the pollutants away, which is really what this bill would do. And so there's been a lot of misperception. I think legislators don't always frequently understand everything, and all they see are, and we don't have it up right now, but that picture, that orange photo of the waterway. So, I'm taking this water away. And so there's been a lot of education that's been necessary as far as changing that misperception of taking away water and pollutants versus taking away the pollutants by treating it. That's okay.
We'll come back. Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing that has happened is there have been watershed organizations that are involved with cleaning up waterways that have signed on to this letter. And one of them is very important because they work in this area, and that's the Eastern Pennsylvania Coalition for Abandoned Mine Reclamation, and that's the picture right there of Robert Hughes, who heads up that organization. Terrific group that's worked for many years on this issue, and as I mentioned, helped craft the Environmental Good Samaritan Act. And here's a letter that they have submitted to legislators to try to educate them about what the possible impacts could be to these sub-watersheds should you take this water away. And I think I have a few copies of this. It's also on the Delaware Riverkeeper Network's website. But I did bring a few if you want to pass them around. And I brought a copy of the letter that is the sign-on letter as well. But I think the Mountain Watershed Association, who's down in the southwestern part of the state, also is a sign-on to this, and the Coalfield Justice Coalition from Western Pennsylvania has also signed on. So we have a very broad number of groups that are involved in this. Just one moment, and so I just, that is basically wanted to point out that there has been an uprising of concern from the communities that would be affected by this, and environmental and watershed organizations that work across the state as a result of this legislation. Anything else you want to add?
That's it.
So why don't we open it up now to questions and answers, and go right ahead.
So I don't know anything about SB 411 until you guys just told me about it, and I have no love lost for any tracker or anything else. As a matter of fact, I love that fish right there.
Yeah.
That's a brook trout.
It's a brookie,
and I do
right.
a lot of fishing in a lot of places across Pennsylvania. So my question is, on the last slide, I think it was, you showed a picture, and up top it said that AMD can be used today by the frackers.
Yes.
Is that true? So it would appear, as you're trying to highlight, I think I get it, that what they really want is they want to use it and get the immunity, right?
That's right.
Okay. But to that extent, my question is fine. So now we have frackers they're already there. I mean, they are fracking, right? And if they have, right now, if they can look around and they can travel 20 miles to get AMD water, or they can travel 3 to get what I would consider to be my current pristine fishing water, where are they going to source that water from right now? Now, my point is, I agree, the immunity is an outrage. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is anyone working on a way to incentivize them to still use AMD but without the immunity? Because right now, they're just going to use my good water.
Well, that's a very good question.
So what is
And
really being done to find a middle ground where, I mean, I can appreciate trying to stop 411 the way it is. I get it. We got to have some middle ground, or else bad things are going to continue to happen to good water. Let alone, I know what you're talking about, you take away the bad water, that doesn't cure anything. I know that. But the converse, what they're doing now is taking away good water and making bad water out of it.
So I think it's a very good question. And, you know, we have been meeting with legislators and talking with those who championed this bill for many months. And it has come down to this. The bill will die if the immunity isn't in it.
Mm.
And that's because they really want the immunity.
I can see that.
And
There's got to be some way to give them something. Can't we figure out a way to give them something? In the case I said, to get them to go travel the 20 miles, rather than take the 3 mile, you know, the good water right next to us. It's got to be, we got to give them, is there any way to give them something?
well, I think the other point there is we can't let that frame this argument. It's not about the water being able to be reduced, the fresh water being able to be reduced by the use of AMD. Because, first of all, we don't know, there are hundreds of billions of gallons of acid mine or alkaline mine or coal-influenced water. There's a lot of it. But we don't know how much of it can actually be used. What is the percent that could be mixed? A sour gas, for instance, which is one of the technical issues that are brought up. How much of it can be used before you have an uncontrollable sulfate problem in your resulting discharge from your waste? We don't know how much worse the wastewater that you have to get rid of and the sludge that you have to get rid of after fracking is going to be if we add this coal mine influenced water. So these are the so what the real issue is, and the way we have to frame this, is how do we stop the damage from fracking, if you want to look at the fracking issue. And the answer is not take water from coal-influenced, coal-damaged waterways and use it for fracking. That is, all that's doing is transferring one problem to another place and creating more problems that we haven't even studied yet. So if we have more, for instance, toxic sludge, and it's an issue that's brought up in the RAND conference, if we have highly radioactive sludge that precipitates out in these big basins where they'd be storing this stuff, what kind of a disposal problem does that present?
That is a
As a matter
general
of fact,
fracking problem, right?
well, but
That's
this,
a
what
general
happens
fracking
with,
problem.
right, but what happens,
That's a different issue.
no, not necessarily, because no, what I'm saying is that what one of these technical papers points out is by adding the sulfate-rich coal mine damaged waters to waters in these big basins, what happens is the solids that are in the waters precipitate out and form a more concentrated radioactive sludge that we don't have any place to get rid of here in Pennsylvania. So that is a serious problem that has not been addressed. So all we're doing is creating a problem by thinking that we're solving a problem, and we're not. We have to head on face the issues of depletion of our fresh water by fracking through reducing that use, not by acid mine drainage, but by confronting fracking itself. Yes?
So
sorry.
basically what you're saying is that we're adding insult to injury.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I'm sorry, just a real quick off-topic
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Since you're an attorney wired into this, House Bill 1576, going anywhere?
You actually might know a little bit more about
Yeah, yeah, we'll see. I mean, it still has to go, through another chamber, and we'll see. Hopefully not.
It hasn't been passed yet, though.
It hasn't been passed
Yeah.
yet, from what I understand.
No, it was held up.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Okay. And I'm just,
I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. I'm glad you asked. You know, and I would just like to add, I think what this gentleman here has pointed out is part of the problem right now in the state, and I don't really want to get on a soapbox, but I will briefly, is that there's been a focus really taken off of the conservation of our natural resources by, I think, a lot of those who are in Harrisburg. And I think we see it with the Endangered Species Bill, we see it with SB 411, we saw it with Act 13, and we continue to see it. And it's particularly unfortunate, and it's one reason why the recent Supreme Court decision was so encouraging for so many people. I keep hearing, you know, from everyone. Because, I mean, so many of our rural communities, I mean, there's a lot of talk in Harrisburg about, you know, regenerating our rural communities. Well, a lot of our rural communities depend on these clean trout streams. A lot of our rural communities are also still damaged from legacy industrial activity, not just mining, but timbering also. And so there's not really been a focus, there's more of a focus on continuing to promote industry under the guise of some sort of, you know, environmental issue, I guess. That's really what we've seen with SB 411, where there is a problem with freshwater withdrawals. There is a problem equally with discharges of shale gas wastewater into clean, pristine streams. But SB 411 doesn't really address any of the problems.
Yes.
I would guess that if I was a fracker, I would just go ahead and take from the 3-mile clean stream rather than worry about immunity from the 20-mile sulfur stream. So I don't think this would really impact that too much. But I guess my question is there any kind of environmental benefit argument being made at all? Are they saying that less AMD water will reach the Schuylkill this way, or like any,
No,
or is it strictly an economic?
It's not, there hasn't been that kind of an analysis done. That's one of the things that Lauren was talking about. We believe they're required to do some sort of pre-analysis before they would approve a bill like this, because we don't know the answer to that question.
Right.
So they haven't said, okay, so many gallons will be removed, or this many miles of stream will be cleaned up. No. And I think, you know, part of the issue here is then you start thinking about it and you say, well, what is this bill all about?
Yeah, I mean,
besides the immunity, who's pushing it?
I mean, what about the base flow downstream of the withdrawal? You know, that's
Right.
Is the stream going to be dried up below, or?
It could be. Now, there are regulations in place that requires, particularly in the Basin Commission watersheds, which is the Susquehanna River Basin Commission and the Delaware River Basin Commission. Now, we have a moratorium on drilling in the Delaware River Basin, so there's no withdrawals for that happening. But in the Susquehanna River Basin, of course, it's head every which way by withdrawals. Now, they do have regulations in place that are supposed to protect the base flow of the stream and not impinge on the ability of that stream to meet its current uses.
Right.
And you know that under the Clean Streams Law also should apply to the Ohio River Basin, which is the other big basin in Pennsylvania.
There is no basin commission.
Unfortunately, there's no basin commission there, so one of the things that we're particularly concerned about is that the Ohio River Basin is probably going to suffer the most if this goes through, because there's less of an analysis that's done. There's not an agency there that looks at the details of what and applies their analysis for what the low flow in the stream or the minimal flow in the stream should be and still support life in that stream and
Right.
drinking water supplies. And that does not happen in the Ohio in the way that it happens in the Susquehanna.
Well, I
So
think it's-
that's where a lot of drilling is going on, and that's where a lot of coal mine influenced streams are. So we have a problem in the Ohio in particular. It would occur also in the
I
Susquehanna.
think they would probably be able to make the argument that just like that yellow creek that you showed, that there's probably no life in that creek anyway, so what's to protect?
Well, the point is this, that there are efforts in communities to clean these streams up.
Right. Oh, yeah, I get that.
We're left with
thinking
this
from the other
legacy of
side.
pollution, and it doesn't mean, and this is really related to what Lauren was saying earlier. Because we've been insulted or injured? Are we going to add insult to that injury or add injury to that insult? I don't think so. As a matter of fact, the Pennsylvania Constitution Environmental Rights Amendment says you cannot do that.
Right.
We can't make sacrifice zones. You can't have one area disproportionately carry the burden of meeting the needs of an industry, for instance, or even other people in the state. You can't disproportionately oppress people and make sacrifice zones where, okay, we've already ruined it with coal, now we're going to take all their water too. As a matter of fact, when speaking with legislators, I had one staff person say to me, yeah, but these are like wilderness areas where it's all destroyed. No, it's not. There are communities that live here. There are farms, there are dairy farms that have water wells that feed their herds. There are communities all throughout, and there's been very good mapping on the EPCAMR and also on the western version of that, very good mapping of where these streams are. So if you go to their website, and their website is on the letter that I passed around, you'll see where there are communities there. And there's actually some pretty built up areas there. And people will be hurt if this base flow is taken away. And if they're, and I think, when you look at this from the big perspective, we really can't tolerate continuing to allow this legacy to influence and degrade these streams and the communities that live there. As a matter of fact, people are stepping forward to clean it up. That's why the Environmental Good Samaritan Act was passed. And now you're essentially, through SB 411, setting up a competitive situation where they have more money, the industry, and they're going to come in and undo the little bits of progress that have been made. And I think that's really unacceptable.
I'm still a little confused with your position, honestly. Meaning, because I think well, here, why don't you answer this? I mean, I understand. I'm on your side. Do not get me wrong. So I guess the problem is, it would seem to me that you would still be adamantly against SB 411 if we could just somehow chop the immunity part off, and somehow we're going to give them, I don't know, an extra little pat on the back and make them feel good if they take mine-damaged water. I don't think you would be behind that for reasons that you said. And yet at the same time, that would mean they'd have to take good water and still have to obey all these laws, and you would rather have them take that than take the mine-damaged water without immunity. I think...
I'm not setting up, the thing is, like I said...
It just seems like there's nowhere for them to go.
You can't...
Not that I want there to be, but they're already there, When the landowner is approached by them and they say, hey man, I'll give you $1 million to drill on your land. The guy says,
yeah,
that's cool, because I'm not doing anything with it. And he says, yeah, I'll take it. And there it is, and that's the beginning. That's hard to stop, but I agree. You have to get all the laws around how they can do it now, but I'm just trying to figure out if those laws aren't like right now, like you said, you got to get it regulated properly, but it's already going now, and I'm just trying to figure out a way to minimize the damage that's already happening right now. I go fishing out by Kettle Creek, I have to drive back by numerous places that have these giant things, right? Yeah. And I'll tell you, I've talked to people out there, and there's two sets of people. Some people love it, and some people hate it. And those are the communities that are right there. And the people that love it are the people that are getting money from it. And the people that hate it are the ones that are, down the road not getting any direct money, and it's just a pain in the ass to them. But even right there in the local community, there's a huge, intense bifurcation.
I think you're bringing up a couple of really great issues.
Very good,
really important issues.
It is fair.
And I think we have to hearken back to on a couple of things for what Lauren said. When are we going to stop looking for short-term gain at the expense of our resources, our communities, and future generations? We just can't tolerate this anymore. Well, and the fact is
let's get Congress to actually pass something. Good luck.
Well, let's talk. Let's talk about first of all, this SB 411 will not move ahead without the immunity provision. That is what it's all about. So set aside SB 411. If you just want to talk about framing the argument of whether or not the water should be used from your local stream or some other place, maybe we should be thinking, and I'm proposing this, and my organization already has a position on this, but I'm putting it out to the group. Maybe we should be thinking about limiting the development of these gas wells in Pennsylvania. And if we put a moratorium, for instance, on gas development, then That would be the way to get them out of your trout stream,
Yeah.
not trying to tell them to go take water from a vulnerable watershed that's already bearing the brunt of coal mine damage.
I agree with that totally.
So we're not going to fall into this trap of saying that we're the ones that want to take the water out of the trout stream. We're not. We're not. That's the industry that wants to do that, and it's the legislature that's in charge of passing the laws that would tell them whether or not they can do it. So, we have to reframe the argument. Yes, sir.
I just have one, just to try and understand the issue a little more. So if they take that water from these polluted, areas with the mine drainage, and then they bring that into areas with ostensibly cleaner water near them, and then they start using that mine drainage water in the fracking operations, won't that end up moving that mine drainage pollution from those areas into what are now clean areas?
Yes.
And basically, and so the immunity would end up encouraging these fracking operations to take pollution from these already harmed areas and move it into areas that are currently clean right now.
Yes.
But isn't
Yes.
it way down below those streams? I mean, it's like hundreds of feet down on the ground, so it's not going to come up to that stream.
Well,
It's still going to be in the watershed though, and so it'll eventually make its way into the
The
stream.
activities
No,
of the
because the
watershed.
streams are hundreds of feet higher than that. They operate off a whole different set of groundwater.
True, but there's a couple things I think he's brought up. I mean, first of all, so when SB 411 first came out, we would have had a situation where the water being taken into the clean watershed, there was a very strong argument that the industry could have made that they were immune from any spills, any leaks, any whatever with that water in the clean watershed. I mean, even now though, even with that gone, you still have the situation of this is being brought in, and I think as you pointed out, yes, it's going down the hole, but one point that's not often talked about in the whole story is the impoundment pits. And the impoundment pits are very poorly regulated. You could probably talk about the proposed regs, but I'm going to keep it broad right now. I mean, these are basically swimming pool liners filled with hazardous wastewater. And when you're putting this mine-influenced water into them, and let's say it has your flowback chemicals, your brines, and all that material, you are creating a new situation in a clean watershed where we don't really know what's going to happen.
And do they have to?
Don't they-
Sorry.
I'm sorry, don't they have, it's like pool to pool with lime in it and so on and so forth for acid mine drainage? Aren't there ways of remediating acid mine drainage?
Oh, yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's a whole big
That's what the
job.
watershed groups are doing. There are many,
Right.
Mountain Watershed Association, EPCAMR have, working on that. If you go on the EPCAMR or the Mountain Watershed Association websites, you'll see some of that. And, there are ways, but it's complex. It really depends, and it changes whether you're in the soft coal or the hard coal regions, whether it's acid or alkaline. All this,
Topography,
the
geology.
topography,
Right.
how much water is in your watershed, all of these things change, depending on site-specific conditions. But yes, they design
doing-
these treatment systems.
Doing that with fracking sludge is like, do we still know what's in the fracking fluids?
Well, we don't. They
Well,
passed a law that they have to tell the state, but the public
DEP
doesn't know it all.
DEP doesn't know.
Does DCNR know?
No.
DEP doesn't
The
know.
DEP 's
The
not.
operators honestly don't really know either.
Right.
Well, I think, and the other thing that Lauren brought up about the impoundments that I was going to mention, to add to that a little bit, is that the Chapter 78, which is the Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Act, just on yesterday.
regulations, yeah.
The proposed regulations comment period just closed yesterday. So these would be changes as a result of the passage of the parts of Act 13 that was not thrown out by the court. And those changes one of the things that was removed from SB 411 is basically through a backdoor way now in those regulations, which would allow coal mine damaged waters, acid mine drainage, mine influenced waters, to be put into what's called a freshwater impoundment that is not designed to hold toxic waste, but is only designed to hold fresh water and is therefore not up to the standards that you would require if you had a hazardous waste pit. Yes. That is absolutely true, and we commented on that, and we are opposed to that, obviously. But, so that is something that if you want to really get worried, start thinking about that, because whether or not they require, how thick the liners are, for instance, is different. Whether or not you have to get a permit from dams and waterways for the sides, and how it is actually structured is much less rigorous for these freshwater impoundments. And now they're going to have this and other effluent from sewage treatment facilities, leachate from landfills, blow down water from cooling towers. These are what they call these other damaged waters that they want to try to get into the fracking process. And it's because it's expensive to go for the fresh water, and they're, the state, as a matter of fact, through their white paper, really steps out, if you look on the DEP website, as being the originators of this whole concept. Because they had this sort of idea, without thinking too hard about it, I think, that this was an answer to this. It was part of the answer of reclamation, but it truly isn't. And so this paper that you can find on their website talks about probably the biggest issue, outside of the technical issues, is the immunity issue. And they actually have in there these different scenarios about what kind of basins you would take it to, because storage is an issue that has to be addressed. And they put forward the concept of giant basins that would hold this stuff, where it's going to be mixed with the water for fracking. So, I think, you get what I'm saying, that the impoundments are actually now on the receiving end being changed in terms of regulation in order to make this even more possible to do with less expense on the part of the industry. Yes.
Hey, we actually, we have a statewide water monitoring program, and I live on the Continental Divide between the Ohio River Basin and the Susquehanna River Basin. We have Messiaen State Forest, and we have actually seen a lot of fracking there. I mean, total devastation. We used to be like really good in the hunting, like the fishing, and it's way going down. So actually the economies and stuff are really hurting up there because of that. Although you're getting here, they're not. But I wanted to tell you guys, like in our area, we've actually seen problems with the liners. We've seen problems with, we had a well blowout in June of 2010. Actually, this is more regulated to the liner, but they're kind of connected. The well that blew out was next to the other well that had the liner problem. So with our water monitoring program, we've been monitoring these streams since '99. So we have really good baseline data for these really pristine trout streams. It is a former coal mining area, so conductivity, how many of you are familiar with conductivity?
Sure.
Okay, most of you are. So basically it's metals, it shows the conductance of the stream. Normally it came in a range of about 30 to 50. So after this liner actually went, it jumped to over 3,000.
Wow.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea of what's coming out. As of now, it's back to about 300. So it's 4 years since that first initial part happened. So just to give you an idea of what's going on in Barway.
I think that's really interesting in responding to you, because it's not just the removal of the water from your trout stream, but it's what's coming into the trout stream from the industrial development. And that's what you were bringing up as well.
Well, this particular one, if you look it up, it is Alex Branch, which runs into Laurel Run, which is a big trout stream. There actually was somebody that just did a big thesis. She's about to release it. And she looked at the whole area around that, and she looked at the amphibian population more than she actually looked at the trout population, but it was very detrimental to all the wildlife around there. In the blowout, we lost probably about 5 acres of bluebird habitat.
Oh my.
Basically what happened is the concoction spewed into the air for about 16 hours before EOG, which is Enron Oil and Gas, by the way. It's a lot of Halliburton. Basically, it took 16 hours for them to fly in a crew from Texas to shut the well down. So
And
that's who we're dealing with.
And I'm glad you brought that up. And this is a little off topic, but since we're on the issue of impoundments, because I had to speak on this in Oregon a couple weeks ago. So, I mean, there's no real, she's brought up the issue of the liners being used in terms of the freshwater versus wastewater, but even in terms of the wastewater impoundments, although an operator technically has to sign off that the liner is going to be compatible, so like the range resources, the XTOs, they really don't know what Halliburton is putting in the ground. DEP doesn't know, and the operator doesn't know, so how are you gonna make sure the liner is gonna be compatible?
I thought DEP got to know.
DEP does not know.
They consider it a trade secret.
They just don't know.
Well, they had to read all,
They
I
don't
mean,
read-
that
they had-
Gaslands movie, they had to read all those ingredients out to the Senate.
They did, but they won't necessarily know the exact composition. And quite frankly, I don't think we're ever gonna really know 100% what's in the wastewater that comes back up.
Right.
Because it's not only bringing, it's the flow back, it's what you put down, but it brings up everything from below also. So,
Yeah, we're at
and
the
there's
end of
no
our time,
presumption
so.
zone.
Yeah, and I think, I think that the problem there is that because we do not know because there's not monitoring required of every frac job. So unless we had an actual sample taken of every single frac job, we wouldn't know that. That's what should happen, but that's not what's happening. I just want to say we're finished now, but I handed these out. It's an action alert, and it's to call your legislator to ask them to vote no on SB 411. Please, I have extras if you want to take them with you.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Vote is Monday.